Morning, everybody. Welcome to the second edition of Back to Basics. And it's my pleasure again to introduce Karen Denton, our Head of Advocacy, Education and Awareness. And she's going to steer you gently into understanding all about retina and vision loss. Morning, Karen.
Morning, everybody. And it's wonderful to be here again as we embark on Back to Basics with Retina South Africa. We do have an acknowledgement, and that is that our education activities are supported by an unconditional grant from Bayer South Africa and Roche Products. Let's start with some interesting facts about the eye. At birth, the eye is relatively large in relation to the rest of the body, and it reaches its full size by the time you're between 8 and 13 years old. Interestingly enough, and this is very relevant for all of us at Retina South Africa, the only living tissue in the body that does not regenerate is the retina. Unlike bones, skin, muscles, if those are damaged, they regenerate, they reform, they're fixed. The retina does not regenerate, and that is very important to remember. We have two eyes that enable binocular vision as the two eyes work together. If we have a quick look at the eye at a glance, we'll notice that there are three main layers, and I'm going to go through all of this in some detail, and we will repeat it as well. The outer layer is very fibrous, protective. It holds the eyeball in place. It looks after the eyeball. It protects the eyeball from damage, etc. The middle layer is, in fact, the nourishing layer, and it contains many blood vessels. It brings oxygen and nutrients into the eye and takes away all the waste products. And the inner layer is known as the optic part of the eye. That is, as we will see later, where we find the retina. The fibrous outer layer is in fact divided into two parts. Most of it is the sclera. The sclera is what we call the white of the eye. And if you look at somebody's eye, you can see the white of the eye. That is the sclera. In the front, the fibrous layer becomes transparent so that we can see through it, so that light can pass through into the eyeball to enable sight. And that is known as the cornea. So the cornea and the sclera form the fibrous outer layer together of the eye. The middle layer, as we said, contains many, many blood vessels, such as arteries and veins. It also contains little muscles. And in the front of the middle layer, we have the iris. And if we look at the iris, we see it is the colored central part of the eye. It has a central hole in it called the pupil. And the muscles within the iris are able to change the size of the pupil in different conditions, allowing it to open up so that your pupil is dilated, or constrict so that it's very, very tiny. And this changes according to the different light conditions, also according to stress, and interestingly enough, also according to mental activity. We find that when people concentrate a lot, their pupil size changes. The way this happens is in the iris, we have little circular muscles. So if you have a circular muscle and that constricts, it is going to cause the pupil to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And this happens when it's very, very light. So light triggers those little circular muscles to constrict and make the pupil very, very small. On the other hand, if you're in an area where it's a little bit darker, there are little radial muscles, and they all around like spokes on a wheel. And when they contract, they pull the pupil open, allowing more and more light to go into the eye. And these two work in conjunction with each other. And the circular muscles and the radial muscles work all the time to adapt your eyes according to the light conditions at that exact moment. Now, the inner layer of the eyeball, and this is the most complex one, it is the retina, which is very, very sensitive to light. And in the retina, there's some obvious things that an ophthalmologist or an optometrist can see when they look into it. The one is the optic disc, where the optic nerve leaves the retina to carry information about the light impulses into the brain. This exact area is just a bundle of nerves, and it is not sensitive to light, and it is referred to as the blind spot. But very close by is the fovea, and it's the thinnest area of the retina and is the most sensitive part of the retina, of the eye. And this is because there are a whole lot of cells there called cones. And we're going to talk about rods and cones in just a moment. So if we had to look at what an ophthalmologist or optometrist can see when they look at the retina, they can see the fovea, and they can see the optic nerve, and they can see whether these are healthy or whether they are being damaged by certain diseases. So in a nutshell then, we've discussed the eye, as you can see on the top left-hand corner, those of you who are able to see, and you'll see the sclera is very, very visible there. And in cross-section there, you'll see the cornea and the lens that we'll talk about in a moment, and the optic nerve leaving the eyeball right at the base. So to recap what we've said now in a little bit more detail, the sclera then we said is the white of the eye. It protects the eye and it keeps light out, except the little bit that comes through the middle and the front through the pupil. The cornea is the transparent bit in the front of the eye that also protects the eye, but interestingly, it also acts as an early lens. The shape of the cornea actually helps to focus the light as it enters the eye. The pupil then, we said, is the opening in the front of the eye. If you look at somebody, it's that black part in the middle of the eye, and it doesn't reflect any light. But we did say it controls how much light enters the eye at any one time. And to do this, it becomes bigger or smaller to let light in or to keep light out. The iris, we said, is the colored part of the eye. And as you know, this can be brown, blue, green, hazel, all different colors. And the iris controls the size of the pupil with those little muscles that we mentioned. The lens is situated just behind the pupil. It is convex shaped, and like any lens, it fine-tunes the focus so that a good image can form exactly as it should on the retina. And there are also very tiny muscles that control the movement and the expansion of the lens or the constriction. Now, the retina that we said, this is the most important part of the eye for vision. Well, every part is important, but this is critical. The retina has very specialized nerve cells called rods and cones. And the rods and cones change the image into an electrical signal before it gets sent to the brain. The retina, as we said, contains rods, and rods, interestingly enough, can sense light, but they're unable to sense color. The cones, on the other hand, sense color. If we look at the cones, there are three types. They're red, green, and blue, commonly known as RGB, red, green, and blue cones. And the wonderful thing is that just with the red, green, and blue cones, we are able to distinguish millions of different shades of color. Isn't that incredible? And then, as we said, the optic nerve carries the electrical signals from the rods and the cones into the brain, where it's interpreted as sight. So light then enters the front of the eye through the pupil. It strikes the retina and then travels along the optic nerve and reaches the visual cortex in the brain, where that picture is interpreted exactly as what one sees in front of you. Now, obviously, if there is a breakdown in any part of this entire system, that is right from the cornea in the front, the lens, through the eyeball, through the retina, through the nerves, or even the brain, you will have a loss of vision. So there's plenty of place along that whole visual pathway for problems to develop. So if we look at this whole picture as one, we find that the lens focuses an image onto the retina. The lens turns that image upside down, interesting, just like a camera does. The cells in the retina change that image into an electrical signal. That goes to the brain via the optic nerve, and the brain then interprets what it has as a picture, turns it the right way up, and allows us to see exactly what is happening in front of us. So if we look at this picture from the right-hand side, if you see that vehicle coming across, that image goes into the eyeball, travels to the retina collects those light impulses, and the photoreceptors change it into an electrical signal, sends it to the brain, and in the visual cortex, we are able to translate that into the picture that we just saw. And there are many, many pictures that you'll be able to access on the internet that show us exactly this. For example, the apple entering the brain, going into the visual cortex. The system is always exactly the same way along. And that brings us to the next chapter that we will talk about, which is how our eyes move. Thank you.
But they still react to light, don't they?
Yes, we will go into that in a lot of detail, and we'll be able to see that, as we said, in a tremendous amount of detail as we cover those aspects of how the light travels to the retina, how it gets changed and then travels along. But we plan to cover that in detail in a later chapter. Carol, you have a question?
How do the optometrists and the ophthalmologists see into the eye?
How do the ophthalmologists and optometrists see into the eye? They have various types of equipment. The one is simply a handheld ophthalmoscope where they can see into the retina, but these days they also have these wonderful machines that are able to look at that retina in a lot of detail. And in fact, some of the optometrists and ophthalmologists even have ones that include AI. They are so smart that they will look at the retina and give a diagnosis before the optometrist or ophthalmologist even has to think about it.
The fundus camera will image the whole back of the eye, the fundus, but it would actually be like the that you showed. Whereas the ocular coherence tomography will actually almost take a cross-section of the retina.
Yeah.
And it looks like a sliced sandwich. It's usually represented in green light. I'd just like to invite the people who are online, if they have a question, to actually go onto the chat, and they can actually put any questions that they like onto the chat. But if you want to raise your hand and speak, that's also okay.
Sonia has raised her hand.
Hi, Sonia. Good morning.
Morning, Sonia.
So, yeah, it's been a very enjoyable listen and watch so far. A question from my side. So when you go to the ophthalmologist, they normally put in some drops to dilate your pupils.
Yes.
Of course, this is so that they can see at the back of the eye. But what are those drops made up of, and how does the drops exactly dilate the pupil?
That's getting very technical. All I know is it's called a mydriatic, and the mydriatic affects the little muscles in the iris that control the size of the pupil, causing it to dilate.
And I think what's important for people to know, if they have peripheral vision loss, that is why if you go to an optometrist, he might not even see it. Nowadays, optometrists are allowed to dilate. Some of them have got the qualification. But if they don't dilate and they look just at the center of your retina, and you've got a disease perhaps like diabetic retinopathy or retinitis pigmentosa, and I know we're probably jumping the gun here, but they won't see the peripheral vision problems. And that is why you might, if you go to an optometrist, some people say, well, they've been to an optometrist and he didn't pick anything up. It's just that he might not have the sophisticated fundus camera to actually look at the outer periphery, and you're always allowed to see an ophthalmologist. And interestingly enough, I don't know if people know this, An ophthalmologist is the one specialist that you don't need a referral from your GP or your optometrist. You can just go, make an appointment and go.
Exactly.
Lindiwe has a question.
I had optic nerve takes information from the cone and the rod and deliver to the brain. So my question is, how long does it take for the brain to interpret the vision?
Lindiwe, close your eyes, or everybody close your eyes. Open your eyes. How long did it take for you to see what's in front of you?
Just a second.
Less
Not-
than a second.
Not even a second. I think it's something like 1/500th of a second or something. It's a very fast process. Thank you for that question. Carol has another question.
Is the eye a complete unit? So would they be able to transplant an eye in some future stage?
They have looked at transplanting eyes, but the problem is that the nerve is very, very difficult to reconnect. And getting a nerve to reconnect is still beyond our technology as far as I know. But maybe one day in the future. But other than that, yes, it's a complete unit. And as I said, in the next section, we're going to look at the muscles of the eye and how the eye moves. And that part would be fairly simple, but getting the nerve to connect is going to be quite a step forward in technology.
And may we also just add perhaps that it's just, even though we call it the optic nerve, and I know again we're jumping the gun, the last step in this whole visual transduction is the ganglion cells, and each ganglion cell has an axon, which is like a little tail, which goes from each of these thousands of ganglion cells to form the optic nerve. So it's not just one little fiber you have to connect, it's hundreds of fibers.
Yeah.
So it's beyond, but who knows?
Yeah. So like many nerves, they are bundles of nerves, and this is a typical bundle of nerves going to the brain.
That was an excellent question. Thank you,
Thank
Carol.
you. I think that's the end of the questions.
Sorry, I just want to comment on something.
Yes.
So I just quickly Googled how long does it take for the brain to interpret what it sees, and the answer is 100 to 150 milliseconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. You can
Yeah.
see Sonia, one of our resident computer experts. Thanks, Sonia. So I think that's all for today. And remember, the link is a continuing link. It's a recurring link, so you use the same links every week. And so thank you, everybody. And Karen, thank you for that illuminating talk. As always, you always reduce very complex information down into small, understandable bits. So thank you for that. And thank you for those who tuned in. And bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Lovely.